They arrived in the Philippines in the middle of a humid afternoon that felt like standing in front of an oven someone had forgotten to close. The team of 4 Ukrainian women, Larisa, Oksana, Katerina, and Mila, stepped out of the airport glass doors like they were entering another planet. Their hair frizzed immediately, their sunglasses fogged up, and their brains tried to understand how everyone outside looked so calm in heat that made them feel like their bones were sweating. But this wasn't the part that confused them first. No, the confusing part came when a Filipino airport staff assisting them smiled warmly and said, "Sige po, ma'am, dito po tayo." The women all looked at one another. The word po echoed in their ears, unfamiliar, polite, yet puzzling. They assumed it meant, please, or maybe, careful, or worse, danger. The man kept using it repeatedly as he guided them through the small crowd. Every sentence seemed to end with it. "Thank you po. Dahan-dahan lang po. Sundu niyo po?" They whispered among themselves as they walked. "What is po?" Mila asked, her eyebrows squeezing. "Maybe it's a title," Katerina said. "Like Sir, Madam, Colonel, I don't know." "It sounds too small to be a title," Oksana countered. "Titles are usually long." "Maybe it's like an apology," Larisa guessed. "He thinks we're confused, so he keeps saying sorry?" They nodded, deciding that was probably correct. Except it wasn't. In the van their hotel arranged for them, the driver also used po 23 times. They counted. They didn't mean to count, but once they noticed it, they couldn't stop. When they arrived at the hotel, the receptionist greeted them with the same melodic cadence. "Good afternoon po. Welcome po. Enjoy your stay po. If you need anything po, just ask po." The 4 Ukrainian women stared at each other in synchronized panic. Mila whispered, "Is this a cult?" Katerina answered, "If it is, it's a very polite one." That was the first Filipino mannerism that confused them, the endless use of po. They didn't understand it, but they certainly felt respected. So respected, they didn't even know how to respond. They settled into their rooms, amazed at how the hotel staff insisted on carrying their luggage, even though the women repeatedly said they could manage. But the staff simply smiled and replied, "It's okay po, ma'am," as if this kindness was automatic, encoded in their Filipino DNA. After resting for a few hours at the hotel in Pasay, they decided to explore the city. They walked outside and instantly met another Filipino manner that puzzled them. A tricycle driver waved at them enthusiastically. "Saan kayo? I can bring you po!" Again with the po. But what shocked them more was the driver's facial expression. Friendly, warm, too friendly. They had been warned that in big cities, people might try to scam foreigners. But this man looked like he'd fight anyone who dared harm them, while also joking about it. They declined politely, explaining they wanted to walk for now. The driver nodded and said, "Ingat po kayo." That confused them all. Ingat? Another mysterious word, but ingat became one of the most beautiful words they would ever learn, eventually. As they walked along the sidewalk, adjusting to the mixture of jeepney horns, street barbecue smoke, and the occasional rooster from nowhere, they witnessed something odd. A group of men suddenly paused beside a crossing and gestured dramatically with both hands, insisting the women cross first. At first, they thought it was a prank. In their home countries, traffic was usually a battle of survival. Cars moved aggressively, pedestrians stepped carefully, and you crossed only when fully sure you wouldn't get flattened. But here, despite the chaotic traffic, drivers stopped for them. The men guiding them didn't even know them, yet treated them like royalty crossing a red carpet. They thanked them, although awkwardly, because they didn't know how to accept such sudden gentlemanly behavior. "Are they always like this?" Katerina asked. "It seems... yes," Larisa replied. "Are we VIPs?" Mila wondered. "No," Oksana said. "I think it is just... Pinoy." That was their second confusing Filipino manner. Unexpected, automatic politeness from complete strangers. They walked through a small community market area in Pasay, drawn in by the aroma of grilled chicken and sweet-smelling pastries. Vendors waved at them and shouted, "Beautiful, beautiful, try po." They weren't offended, just overwhelmed. At a fruit stand, a vendor excitedly convinced them to taste mangoes. Try niyo po, the best po in the world. She sliced one open, handed it to them, and waited with glowing eyes. The Ukrainian women tasted it. No exaggeration. Their souls left their bodies. This was not mango. This was divine nectar disguised as fruit. Wow, Mila said, blinking rapidly. The vendor clapped her hands. Masarap po, diba? Another new word. Masarap. They assumed it meant, oh my god, this is good, because that's exactly how they felt. They ended up buying 2 kilos of mangoes, even though they had no plan other than eating them in the hotel room while talking about how shocking this country already was. The vendor slipped an extra mango into their bag. Free po, she said with a wink. The women stared, confused. Free? Why? They barely said anything except thank you and very good. Why is she giving us something for free? Larissa whispered. Maybe we accidentally subscribed to something, Mila said. A mango membership? Oksana joked. But no, Filipinos did this. They later learned the magic word, extra. Or worse, free taste. The women went on walking, overwhelmed by how many people greeted them. Even strangers sitting at tricycle terminals waved or smiled. Kids waved at them for no reason. Teenagers giggled shyly when they passed. Old ladies offered them seats on crowded benches even though the women insistently declined. It was a completely different social environment, one where warmth wasn't a luxury but a default. Their next confusing moment came when they entered a small carinderia near the hotel. The moment they stepped inside, almost every person stopped eating to look at them. But it wasn't a rude stare. It was curiosity. Pure, innocent, wide-eyed curiosity. The owner rushed over with a giant grin. Hello, po! First time niyo po? The women nodded. Ay, welcome po! Sit po! I'll prepare something special po! 5 po's in one breath. This woman could win an award. They tried to order, but every time they picked a dish, the owner somehow added another plate. You try adobo po. Also pancit po. Also lumpia po. Favorite po of foreigners. And chicken inasal po, para may variety po. They ended up with a table full of dishes, even though they only intended to get a small snack. The owner proudly stood in front of them while they tried everything. This is too much, Larissa whispered to her friends. She is feeding us, Mila said. Like we're her long-lost children, Oksana added. I think she adopted us, Katerina concluded. They laughed together as the owner kept returning to check their reactions. The kindness felt overwhelming, not the fake customer service type, but the genuine, I want you to be happy in my place type. When they left, the owner refused to let them pay full price. The women stood outside afterward, holding their stomachs and processing the experience. Their hearts were full but confused. What is happening in this country? Mila asked. I don't know, Larissa replied, but I feel like I'm being hugged by everyone. As they walked back to the hotel in the early evening, they encountered something even stranger. Filipinos insisting they walk ahead or pass through doors first. Every single time. When they tried entering a convenience store, a teenage boy held the door open for them. Inside, another stranger stepped aside dramatically, making a sweeping hand gesture like presenting a queen. When they left, the same boy saw them again and bowed slightly. Bye, Po. They giggled uncontrollably once they were far enough. Why are they like this? Mila whispered. Maybe we look like diplomats, Katerina said. We are in sundresses and sandals, Oksana replied. We do not look like diplomats. Then maybe we just look lost, Larissa said. But deep inside, it warmed them. This mannerism, Filipinos stepping aside, letting others go first, felt symbolic, like a physical form of humility. Their next cultural shock happened later that night at a 7-Eleven. They were checking out snacks when a man politely raised his eyebrows at them. This was not flirting. It was a question, a silent sentence, a whole paragraph. The infamous Filipino eyebrow raise. Did he just talk with his eyebrows? Mila asked. Yes, Oksana replied in disbelief. He asked if we were buying that. And we answered with our eyebrows back, Katerina realized. They burst into laughter right there in the aisle. It was hilarious, confusing, and strangely efficient. They were slowly learning a new language, one that required no words. Later, as they walked back to the hotel, something subtle happened. A group of Filipinos sitting outside saw them and called out, "Ingat!" They didn't know the meaning then, but the tone was unmistakable. Care, concern, warmth. The next morning, they woke up to sunlight piercing through the curtains and the distant sound of honking, jeepneys starting their day. They went out for breakfast and encountered a new manner, Filipinos asking if they had eaten yet. "Have you eaten po?" "Breakfast na po?" "Kain po." This confused them even more. Were Filipinos monitoring their meals? Was this country obsessed with their stomachs? They learned later that this wasn't literally a question. It was a greeting disguised as a mother's concern, and they loved it. As they continued to explore Manila, they noticed something universal among Filipinos: the smile. Not the fake customer service smile, the real, genuine kind that reached the eyes. The 4 Ukrainian women came from a country where smiling at strangers was rare unless there was a reason. Here, people smiled as easily as breathing. It made them soften gradually. It made them feel safe. It made them feel welcomed in a way they had never felt anywhere else. One afternoon, a rainstorm hit suddenly, the kind of rain that fell sideways and soaked everything in seconds. They ran toward cover, laughing and screaming, trying to protect their hair and phones. A Filipino family sitting under an awning saw them and immediately pulled them under. "Tara po dito! Come po! Basang-basa na po kayo!" The family squeezed together, making room for all 4 Ukrainian women. They offered towels, insisted the women sit, and even handed them hot pandesal from a plastic bag. This was the moment that truly overwhelmed them. No cameras, no expectations, no reason. Just pure, unconditional hospitality. The women sat with the family for 20 minutes, sharing small conversations and laughter until the rain slowed. When they left, the family waved at them like they were relatives going off to school. The Ukrainian women walked away speechless. It was the first time they understood something important. Filipino manners weren't just social quirks. They were reflections of love, compassion, and care for strangers. That night, in their hotel room, they talked about everything, recalling every confusing, funny, and heart-tugging moment. Larissa said, "I feel like this country is teaching us how to be softer." Katerina nodded. "And how to be warmer." Mila smiled. "And how to be more human." Oksana added softly, "We came here to explore, but it feels like we are being rebuilt." They didn't know it yet, but their journey had only begun. The deeper they went into Filipino manners, the more they would discover. Manners that would reshape their outlook on friendship, humility, kindness, and life itself. And in the next chapter of their story, they would visit the provinces, where Filipino manners grew even more heartwarming, confusing, and unforgettable. They had no idea how much this country was about to change them. The Ukrainian team woke up to another humid Manila morning, the kind of heat that made their hair frizz and their patience melt, yet somehow also made everything feel alive. They had spent several days trying to decode the quirks of Filipino manners, how everyone apologized for everything, how sorry ha was practically a national greeting, and how Filipinos could make you feel personally adopted within 2 minutes of meeting them. But nothing had prepared them for how these quirks followed them everywhere they went, from malls to jeepneys to sari-sari stores. And today, they were about to discover even more. The team had decided to take a combined immersion trip, half the day in Manila, half in a random province recommended by their Filipino friend, who simply said, "Go to Batangas, masarap ang kape doon." They didn't fully understand the sentence, but they understood KP, and that was enough motivation. The team loved coffee almost as much as they loved trying to understand why Filipinos said the word po so many times in one conversation. They started the morning in Manila, walking along the bustling streets near Divisoria, soaking in the energy. Every stall owner shouted friendly greetings at them, waving enthusiastically. The Ukrainians waved back, startled and charmed at the same time. One vendor yelled, "Maganda ka! Cheap lang!" The Ukrainian women had already learned that maganda meant beautiful, so they grinned proudly, only to realize later that the vendor said it to absolutely everyone. The compliment wasn't personal, it was part of the sales tactic. Still, they appreciated it. At one stall, they witnessed a Filipino mannerism that confused them deeply. The polite pointing. A vendor asked where they were headed, and when they answered, he used his lips, not his finger, to point toward the street they needed to follow. The Ukrainians stood there frozen, unsure whether they had imagined it. They nudged each other. Was that normal? They tried to imitate it discreetly, but it only made them look like they were blowing kisses at strangers. The vendor laughed so hard he nearly fell off his chair. They continued their Manila journey, discovering another Filipino manner that baffled them, the automatic, "Have you eaten?" greeting. A group of Filipinos sitting inside a small carinderia waved at them and said, "Kain tayo." The Ukrainians looked at each other, unsure whether this was a literal invitation or just a figure of speech. Their Filipino friend explained, "They don't actually expect you to eat. It's just being friendly." But one woman in the group insisted they join, so suddenly they found themselves sitting at a plastic table, trying lugao and pandesal with strangers who swore they were now friends forever. The Ukrainians laughed at how quickly relationships formed here. Back home, friendships took time. Coffee dates, conversations, shared life experiences. Here, all it took was offering someone food and saying, "Kain tayo." The simplicity was disarming and oddly beautiful. Later, while walking to their van, one Ukrainian accidentally bumped into a Filipino teenager. She immediately blurted out, "Sorry po." The Filipinos froze for a moment, shocked and delighted. The teenager's eyes widened, his jaw dropped slightly, and then he grinned like he had just been blessed by an angel. "You said po!" he exclaimed. The entire street cheered. Vendors clapped. Someone even recorded it on their phone. The Ukrainians had never experienced such enthusiastic approval for a simple word. But the day was only beginning. They moved to Batangas for the second half of their immersion, and the atmosphere changed instantly. The traffic was lighter, the air cleaner, and the smiles somehow even bigger. Their first stop was a small cafe near the beach where they were greeted with a chorus of, "Ay, hi po mom." The Ukrainians laughed at how even in casual settings, Filipinos still added po, as if respect was stitched into their DNA. A waitress brought them kapeng barako, and they were stunned by the strength of the drink. One woman whispered, "This is not coffee. This is a punch to the soul." But they loved it. They watched locals order coffee and immediately dipped their pandesal into it, something they had never seen before. When they tried it, they found it unexpectedly delicious. They also noticed another Filipino manner, the habit of refusing help at first even when they clearly needed it. At the cafe, a man struggled to carry boxes while repeatedly saying, "Okay lang, kaya ko pa." The Ukrainians exchanged looks. He did not look okay, and he definitely could not carry the boxes alone. They approached him to help, and he protested again before finally giving in with a shy laugh. They were learning that Filipinos often said no when they meant yes, and said okay lang when things were very clearly not okay. After their coffee break, the Ukrainian team headed to a local market. There, they observed another Filipino trait, extreme politeness even during disagreements. Two older women argued over the price of vegetables but still referred to each other as "ate," their voices gentle despite the tension. It was like watching a fight wrapped in a hug. Back in Ukraine, arguments tended to be more intense, more direct. Here, even conflict had manners. The Ukrainian women tried bargaining for fun, and the vendors chuckled at their attempts. When one Ukrainian overdid her bargaining attempt, the vendor patted her shoulder and said kindly, "Ay ma'am, konti lang po." The Ukrainians melted at how gentle Filipinos were even when correcting someone. Next, they visited a coastal community where they were invited to join a family lunch. They tried to politely refuse, but the family insisted with such warm smiles that refusal became impossible. When they sat down, they encountered yet another Filipino manner, the habit of giving guests the best portions. They barely touched the dishes, yet the hosts kept urging them to eat more. Even the children insisted they share the fried fish. At one point, a Ukrainian woman tried to help clean up the dishes, But the grandmother immediately intercepted with an offended gasp, saying, "Ay, wag na po, kayo pa?" The Ukrainians apologized the Filipino way, soft voice, gentle smile, slight bow, and everyone laughed, delighted at how well they were adapting. After lunch, the family gifted them fruits. When they tried to decline, the hosts insisted harder. They had already learned the Filipino rule. Refusing gifts required at least 3 rounds of polite back and forth. Anything less was considered rude. The Ukrainians surrendered and accepted the fruits with a smile. As the day went on, they noticed how people in the province added ho instead of po, and how the accent sounded sweeter. Everywhere they went, strangers offered help, advice, snacks, tricycle rides, directions, and unsolicited weather forecasts. One fisherman even said, "Mag-ingat kayo ha," with such sincerity that it warmed the Ukrainian women's hearts. Before heading back to Manila, the team stopped by a beach. There, they saw a group of Filipinos asking a foreign tourist to take a picture. But instead of saying cheese, the locals shouted, 1, 2, 3, smile. The extra English word amused the Ukrainians, who later learned that Filipinos said smile because it was easier to pronounce than cheese. While sitting by the shore, the Ukrainian women talked about how these Filipino manners, small, seemingly insignificant habits, were changing them. Back home, people were polite, but they did not use a separate language of respect like po and opo. They didn't point with their lips, didn't invite strangers to eat, didn't cheer when someone showed cultural effort, didn't insist on giving the best portions of food, and didn't take refusal as a challenge to show more kindness. They realized that Filipino manners were not just manners, they were a lifestyle, a worldview built around compassion. These small gestures said everything. I respect you. I want you to feel comfortable. I want you to eat. I want you to feel welcome. On the drive back to Manila, the Ukrainian women talked about how they wanted to bring some of these habits home. They imagined saying, "Kain tayo," to their neighbors in Kyiv, or using po with their baristas. They laughed at the thought of Ukrainians reacting with confusion. But beneath the laughter was genuine admiration. When they finally returned to their hotel, the staff greeted them cheerfully, asking if they had already eaten. The team smiled back warmly, answering with confidence, "Yes, po." The lobby erupted in delighted reactions. The staff clapped. Someone recorded it again. The Ukrainians realized that in the Philippines, even a simple polite word could spark joy. They went up to their rooms, exhausted but filled with gratitude. Today had been long and confusing and funny and deeply touching. The Filipino manners they once found puzzling were now beginning to feel familiar, comforting even. They felt like they belonged, not because they were perfect, but because Filipinos welcomed them with open arms. They drifted off to sleep knowing that tomorrow they would discover even more quirks, more gestures, more phrases, more habits that would confuse them at first, but eventually become part of who they were becoming. Foreigners who had slowly, unknowingly been adopted by the warmth of Filipino culture.